Science Cafe, science for the community. Tonight we're going to be talking about Lyme disease. Just yesterday on CBS News, the experts proclaimed that we were going to have twice the number of Lyme disease cases this spring, with a very large number of ticks and a very large number of infected ticks. That will be approximately, as predicted, 400,000 new cases of Lyme disease this year. More than new cases of cancer. And just think, in 1975, when Lyme disease was first determined and named for Lyme, Connecticut, that was before we had identified HIV/AIDS. And we've made more progress in treating HIV/AIDS than we have in Lyme disease. Why is Lyme disease so hard to treat? Why does it cause so much suffering? Why is it increasing in incidence, not decreasing in incidence? And why does the government spend 1,000 times more money on research on other infectious diseases and cancer than it does on Lyme? What are some of the new approaches that we have to combat Lyme disease? And what is the future going to look like for patients suffering from Lyme disease? Well, we're going to have 3 heroes in the war on Lyme disease that are going to be trying to answer those questions tonight. Our first hero is Sam Shor, who's a practicing physician, and he's devoted his entire career to helping patients with tick-borne diseases and Lyme disease. He's the president of the American Association of Lyme Disease, and he has fought an uphill battle to champion treatment for his patients. He was a visionary, seeing that this is just going to be an increasing problem in the future, long before anybody else, and so he devoted his career to this topic. Our first hero. Our second hero is Ross Dunlap, who's CEO of Ceres Nanoscience, and he's put a new test for Lyme disease, a more accurate test than ever before for Lyme disease, as the highest priority for his new company. He will use the nanoparticles that Dr. Luchini will tell you about later, but I want to emphasize that Ross Dunlap of Ceres is a new kind of entrepreneur. He's thinking about public benefit first, not just the bottom line of money, although I know he has to think about raising money just as well, but he has devoted himself to raising millions and millions of dollars, which have come into Ceres, specifically to develop a point-of-care Lyme test to help everyone. Really a fantastic inspirational figure. As you know, every time we hold this event, we try to have an inspirational role model, a hero, a scientific thought leader, and we have all of those here. The third speaker is Dr. Alessandra Luchini. She has been a pioneer developing the nanoparticles, which Ceres is using in their test. And she will tell you her personal story of how she saw why test for Lyme disease was really needed, and how she brought that all the way to clinical testing. So I'm going to ask Ross to come up and introduce Dr. Shor, but he can say a little bit about his company before he does that. And then after Dr. Shor speaks, I will introduce Dr. Luchini.
Thank you, Lance. Very nice introduction, Lance. Really, when we're talking about inspirational heroes, I think Lance sums up everything described in the 3 of us. And if I were to tell you about all his accomplishments, we'd probably be here all night. So I'll leave it at that and say Lance has been an incredible mentor and supporter of all the work we do at Ceres in close collaboration with Mason. So, good evening. Again, I'm Ross Dunlap, the CEO of Ceres Nanosciences. My company develops and delivers the novel nanotrap particle technology that enables a range of powerful diagnostic tests. So we're doing a lot of other tests, not just Lyme disease. We're doing things with Ebola, malaria, tuberculosis, drugs of abuse. We're applying this platform to enable so many areas where more accurate, more sensitive, better testing is needed and can really have big outcomes on patient health. And we've applied this to develop a novel test for Lyme disease, and we put a lot of our resources, a lot of our time. For 4 years now, we've had a team dedicated to advancing the science, understanding how our Lyme test can better improve patient health care. We've been able to do so really because of the expertise we get in partnership with the world-class scientists here at George Mason University. We're located across the street in our own facilities, but we have many collaborations with the Mason team, and we operate in some cases hand in hand with them. And also, we've been able to accomplish this because of the commitment and passion from leading medical professionals in the field of Lyme disease, such as Dr. Shor. So it's really my honor to introduce him tonight, really one of the leaders in the field of medical practice for Lyme disease. A little bit more about Dr. Shor and our relationship with him. He's been a collaborator of ours and George Mason for many years now. He's supported clinical study work that we've had ongoing with the goal of understanding Lyme infection and developing better testing methods for Lyme. He's had a very long career in patient care and a strong commitment to public service and education around Lyme disease and other associated diseases. In addition to running a very busy patient care center here in Northern Virginia, he serves as the president of the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society, also known as ILADS. And I've gotten to know him over the past few years through our clinical study work, and I truly count on him as an invaluable contributor to our understanding of patient and physician perspectives and needs for novel testing approaches and treatments in Lyme. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce my friend and collaborator, Dr. Shor.
Thank you for the introductions. I wasn't really quite sure about whom you were talking, but that's okay. I was asked 2 days ago to put together what my thoughts on my perspective of Lyme disease and how it has impacted my life. The story goes back. I've been in practice, primary care internal medicine since 1985. And soon after starting to go into practice, I began seeing patients with chronic fatigue. And that was in the late 80s, and evolving was this concept of the yuppie plague and the chronic Epstein-Barr virus and chronic fatigue, and ultimately, CFIDS and then CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. And so I was drawn to the complexities of this multi-system process and saw time after time people coming in with fractured non-restorative sleep, chronic fatigue, cognitive impairment, chronic pain, autonomic dysfunction like POTS where your blood pressure drops and heart rate goes up. But time and time again, it just examples of the same pattern. So the pattern recognition was real, and as you might imagine, trying to manage folks with these complexities was challenging, so we were constantly looking for better ways to identify and to treat these folks. Well, about 12 years ago, I learned of a potential Lyme connection and went to my first ILADS meeting, and they were talking about the people I was managing, but they had identified that many of them had an infection due to the organism Galileo, which you'll hear about, which is responsible for the infection, Lyme disease. And it was like a light bulb went off in my head, and I began looking at my patients differently and providing them with a different management strategy, so that 2 or 3 years after I'd done that, I said, I'm getting a lot of people better that I wasn't getting better before. I mean, I was helping people, but they were plateauing at a point which was very frustrating for me. And I published a paper in 2011 having reviewed my database where 209 patients fulfilled the definition for chronic fatigue syndrome, which is a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning that you've got to rule out other causes of chronic fatigue before you can make that diagnosis. And Lyme disease, I was on the Virginia Governor's Task Force for Lyme disease, and one of our position statements was there is no test yet that can absolutely rule out Lyme disease. So you've got a condition that can cause chronic fatigue that can't be ruled out, and a condition that requires all other conditions to be ruled out. So there's a conundrum. And as it turns out in my data analysis, the majority of my patients who had blood tests negative for Lyme disease, who fulfilled the definition for chronic fatigue syndrome, actually had blood test negative Lyme disease and clinically responded to appropriately directed management. I look at, as things evolved, we've matured our approach to dealing with this and excited about collaborating with the folks that you're going to be seeing tonight. But there definitely are major barriers that we all see in relation to this condition. I characterize it as a perfect storm. You've got a growing tick population, particularly given the very mild winter that we have, a growing population that have more ticks infected with the organism, have more ticks infected with co-infections, which are other organisms that can be transmitted at the same time. They're very small, so the majority of people with Lyme disease never know that they've been exposed. The majority of people with Lyme disease never get a classic erythema migrans rash, the bullseye rash, and they just start to get sick. And the tests are poor, so they come down with very chronic, very common symptoms: fatigue, joint pain, sleep disorder. Who doesn't have that at some point or another? But these folks are at times very disabled. And then you've got a medical community that denies the mere existence of this chronic disease because there's not a test that can prove that that's what they have. So you have to actually use clinical judgment and look at the risks that an individual has and their clinical presentation of the myriad of phenomena to which I've alluded and many others. It's characterized as the new great imitator because it can mimic so many other conditions. And very often these conditions are idiopathic. I love to characterize this. Idiopathic means we're pathetically idiots. We don't know the cause. But in many cases, such as multiple sclerosis, some cases of multiple sclerosis, some cases of Parkinson's, some cases of rheumatoid arthritis, they actually are due to this infection. I've cured multiple sclerosis with antibiotics in an appropriately targeted individual. But it requires an individual to sit down and talk to patients and spend time with them, which is another major dilemma in managed care, where physicians are being forced to run patients through the mill and can't spend the time that these folks very often need. And you've got a political environment which suppresses the real data that is published, indicating that this is a real concern. And it's our hope that we will continue to collaborate and educate patients to be more aware, as well as the medical community to be more aware and accepting, so that we not only don't let patients fall through the cracks, but we do the research that we need to better diagnose and better manage folks who are chronically disabled, because it absolutely can affect profoundly patients' lives, the lives of their family, financially, emotionally, functionally. It has a profound effect on many individuals. And I feel that I am honored to have the opportunity to help many people who unfortunately can't find the help elsewhere because it's just not well understood. Not only is it not well understood, but as I say, it's suppressed, so that when an individual goes to an ivory tower facility and says, I've got chronic Lyme disease, no you don't, it's in your head. And be very condescending about it. Well, I can't tell you the number of patients I've had referred by psychiatrists because they say it's not just, well, it is in their head in a sense because there's an infection there. But, and people certainly can feel isolated when they are ill and frustrated by chronic pain and dysfunctionality. And particularly when children grow up and they're not going to school and they see their friends going off and doing their things, and let alone adults, obviously. Anybody can be adversely impacted in their stage of their lives, but it's our role as healers to help as best we can and to be empathetic, to listen to people and not minimize what they're saying, because if a physician listens to their patient, invariably they're going to get important information that's going to help direct the management of that individual. And it's this open-mindedness that's gotten me to where I am, whether for good or for bad, but I think on the whole it's for good. But there is a lot of political pressure for people who want to deny the existence of the Infectious Disease Society of America, the CDC, that adheres to their guidelines, particularly in relation to this condition, denies the presence of chronic Lyme disease, which I characterize as a chronic infection, chronic active infection that is responsible for perpetuation of a number of clinical signs and symptoms. And we've been able to prove that through the paper that we published in collaboration in 2015. The nanotrap, which Dr. Luchini is going to discuss, represents an individual who has active infection. If it's positive, it's active infection. And we provided patients who were chronically ill on chronic antibiotics for months and months and months who still had positive nanotrap. That was proof positive that chronic Lyme disease does exist, and I hope to continue the work with them. Thank you.
Now we're going to hear about some really cool new technology. And we as scientists, we love new technology, not just because it's cool, but it's because what you can do with it, what you can discover with it, that allows you to find things that you never knew before, gives you new ideas and new ways to diagnose and treat disease. Example is when Galileo discovered the telescope, and he used the telescope and he looked up at the moons of Jupiter, and he thought, the moons can go around Jupiter, so maybe the Earth can go around the sun. There was a cool technology that he used for a new purpose to get new ideas. Then he went on to study, against the wishes of the Catholic Church, the anatomy of the human body by dissecting cadavers in secret at the University of Padua outside Venice in Italy. Why do I bring up Galileo? Because the spirit of Galileo is living on in our next speaker, Dr. Alessandra Luchini, because she is studying really cool technology, but it's not just that it's cool, it's what you can do with it. It's like a telescope. Instead of looking up into the heavens, it looks down into the body fluid, the blood and the tissue, and where you can look at things that you could never see before. It was invisible, just like the moons of Jupiter were invisible. The particles of infectious diseases that she can see in the urine were impossible to see before. And she's going to tell you about how she saw the value of this technology for Lyme disease based on one of her students. She's an inspiration to students. She's internationally recognized for her work. She's a tenured professor at George Mason University, and she won the award for the, out of the top 10 people, this is an application by worldwide competition for the top 10 most brilliant scientists under the age of 40 by Popular Science. So here's Dr. Luchini's going to tell you about a really cool technology, but not just about the technology, but what you can do with it for Lyme disease.
Thank you, Lance, for the terrific introduction. And who knows, maybe am I even related to Galileo? Being Italians, we'll never know. So my passion and interest for diagnostic technologies stems from the fact that since I was little, I wanted to know the truth. What is the truth? It's almost like finding what causes a disease. It's almost an FBI crime scene. Who is the culprit? Can I find some signs that the murderer left? But finding the truth, it is not easy. Sometimes it's deceptive and the logic doesn't help. And in this painting, do we go upstairs? Do we go downstairs? The brain cannot wrap itself around it. Sometimes we do not want to see the truth. It's right in front of us, but we don't want to look at it. Sometimes we use the wrong technology. We need the right thing to see the right information. So the disease we are talking today, it is deceptive in nature, as Dr. Shor very nicely put. And imagine a situation like this, in which your 9-year-old kid comes back and has a facial paralysis. I can imagine like my heart would sink and I would think, oh my God, this is a stroke, what am I going to do? And in this specific case, the kid was brought to a doctor, a very well-informed doctor that recognized the Bell palsy and recognized that is one of the characteristic signs of Lyme disease, and the kid was treated for a month with antibiotics, and she was fine. So she was doing well after that. But this is one of the signs of an early Lyme disease. There are situations in which things don't go well, as we heard. Examples of kids that were not treated properly because either they didn't see the tick, the doctors, they didn't recognize the problem, and in this case, she went on into college, and abruptly she moved from being a very athletic young lady to be completely crippled and unable to function. So this is about the severity and the problems related to Lyme disease. As Lance was saying, how did we go into Lyme disease? This is Temple Douglas. At the time, she was a senior at Thomas Jefferson High School for Technology, and this is her dog. And the dog has a very important role in this story because Temple came to the lab and she said, I kind of like what you guys do, but I think a very important application would be to find a new test for Lyme disease. I'm telling you, my family, my mom, my sister, my grandmother, my dog, they have this disease and nobody knows how to recognize it. And so she took on, being a high school student, the preliminary work, and she found the reagents, and she did the work, and she wrote a paper, she filed a patent. And the first individual, or shall I say, patient that was tested with this test 8 years ago, it was her dog. And I still, to this day, can picture Temple running after his dog to try and collect the urine, but that ended up in the publication, and it was the very seminal proof of concept that the nanotrap could be used to see pieces or information of the Borrelia antigen in the urine of somebody. So Lyme disease is caused by a bacterium that is called Borrelia burgdorferi, and is transmitted by a tick. We heard there are hundreds of thousands of patients every year. So it is a national problem, and has, of course, Lyme patients are also outside the United States. If not properly treated, Lyme disease can have serious complications. It goes into the joint, it goes into the heart, it goes into the brain. We need to tackle the problem early. The reality is that there is not a good diagnostic test. The current test that is approved is an indirect test, is antibody-based, and has very low sensitivity. What that means for the patient is that if the serology turns out positive, we are fairly sure that we do have the Lyme disease. But the serology comes back negative, we have kind of 50-50 tossing the coin, that we can still be sick. because the test has a hard time recognizing if the patient has an active infection. So what is serology? The serology is a test that looks if the patient has developed the antibodies. So what we do, we have a cultured Borrelia that is chopped into pieces and put essentially on a piece of paper, and then the blood of the patient is deposited on this paper. If the patient has the antibodies against the Borrelia, then we will see a signal. We will see a band, we will see some color development. So we have a way to figure out if the antibody is present in the blood of the patient. What is the antigen test on the other hand? Here we have a schematic of the Borrelia bacterium, and here we have a protein that sits on the external part of the surface of the bacterium. That is the protein that we want to look for. So when we harbor Borrelia in our body, then there's going to be some shedding of this protein in our body fluids, mainly in the blood, and then the blood will circulate. There's going to be some filtration through the kidney, and then following this path of the protein in our body will be in the bladder. We collect the urine containing this protein, and we will analyze the urine. So on our paper now, we look for the presence of the antigen of the Borrelia. So these are two approaches that are very different, and for the serology, there is a problem. The body has to produce the antibody, and so there is some time lag. In this scheme, we have, for example, the production of antibody, two different forms of antibody that happens after a certain window. In that window of time, after tick bite, there is no way a serology can detect if we have Lyme disease or not. But here comes the idea of using an antigen test, because the antigen will go up quicker and will persist in the patient if the disease is not eradicated. So that's the value of having an antigen test. One, we can detect the disease earlier, and two, we can understand if the therapy has worked or not. So it's all great, and why does not everybody has an antigen test for infectious diseases like Lyme disease? Because it's horrendously hard. These proteins are in very low abundance, like 1 little protein in like 5 liters of blood. It's very hard to find it, and the blood and the urine are populated with a lot of other resident proteins that we don't care about. So technologically, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And on top of that, we have some natural mechanism to degrade proteins after we collect the biofluid, like the urine. We have enzymes, we have bacteria that degrade the protein. So we have a two-phase problem: low abundance and the presence of very labile compounds that are degraded very fast after we collect the sample. So what did we come up with? The nanotrap. The nanotrap is a nanotechnology, is a sphere, has a very high affinity bait that almost goes around and fish for this biomarkers that derive from the infectious disease agent. And in presence of, let's say, pieces of Borrelia here that are identified with bees, we add the nanoparticles, and they will suck, almost like a vacuum cleaner, all the biomarkers. And then we can extract these particles. So now we left behind all the proteins we don't care about, and in our particle we have only the proteins that we do care about, and then we collect them in a small volume. Here we have a very high amplification factor because we have a partially purified population of protein, and it's restricted in a smaller volume. So there is some chemistry that goes into that. We build it in the lab. Now Ross company distributes that to patient benefit. The key concept is that we have this high affinity bait that binds to protein very fast and very tight. As a result, we can see biomarkers that previously were invisible. So if we look in this graph, this is the concentration of the biomarkers. Up here is what we can see without the nanoparticles. Down here is what we can see with the nanoparticle. It's almost like being able to see very, very deep in our expedition to find the truth. So what the test ends up being, it's a urine test. So we collect a cup of urine from the patient. We want it to be highly sensitive. In other words, we don't want to miss patients. It's very important in this case that if somebody is sick, then we can identify the Borrelia protein with it. But we also want that the test being absolutely specific. We don't want to confound our Borrelia protein with some other diseases. So we have the strategies to tackle both problems. For the specificity, we put the great care of identifying our reagents in such a way that we are sure they target a specific sequence of the whole protein. Because one of the biological strategies that the Borrelia has to evade our immune system is to change its sequence very much. It's almost like the flu, every year it changes, and so we have to get vaccinated every year. The Borrelia does that to a certain extent, so we have to be sure that our test targets an area that is there all the time. And we also show that is conserved across different strains and species of Borrelia. So as Dr. Shor was mentioned, he was one of the very first believers of the test, and we had and we still have a clinical trial that allows us to collect urine specimens from patients suspected of having Lyme disease. At the same time, a serology is run, and then we run our test, and then we compare the results, and we match the results also all the clinical impressions that the curing physician has. So what did we find from this clinical trial? Well, patients that have the classic EM rash, and so they are clinically considered acute patients of Lyme disease, they do have the proteins in their urine, exactly like Temple's dog had in the beginning. And this is the way they look like with our analysis. If we see this dark dot or band on our paper, we can say that the OSPA is present, so our antigen is present, the bacterium is in the body of the patient. Then we run a very big number of negative patients just to be sure that we were not misdiagnosing anybody, and we see a complete absence of protein. So here we have a test that is able to discriminate with high accuracy who has the disease from who doesn't have it. And then we went on to analyze patients that are more controversial. And the question is still open, and as Dr. Shor was saying, there is a whole organization, the Infectious Disease Society of America, that does not believe that such a thing as a chronic Lyme infection exists. And they recommend only a short period of treatment for the antibiotic, which is 1 month, and then after that, what happens, happens. On the other hand, the ILATS that is guided by Dr. Shor, they think, well, there is a possibility of persistence of the infectious disease, similarly to other infectious diseases. Let's treat the patients based on their symptoms. If the patients look sick after the first treatment, maybe it's worthy to do a second treatment. But because of this clear statement of the different societies and the CDC, doctors have been sanctioned and even lost their license for treating this kind of patients. So it is a very animated debate, and there is a lot of controversies around the persistence of an infection of the Lyme disease. So what did we find in this population of patients that is suspected of having Lyme disease? Originally, we found that 40% approximately of the patients that we analyzed, they had persistence of the bacteria in their body in face of multiple treatments. So this is a very solid, molecularly based proof that the disease is indeed in the patient even after therapy. Then the clinical trial has been extended nationwide. And so Virginia is considered an endemic region. If we look at the percentage of suspected patients that harbor the Borrelia protein in their urine, then we see a lower percentage, 15 to 20%. So we see that in endemic area, the percentage of patients that are positive for this test increases with respect to the general US geographical distribution. So these results, they highlight this very important question. So first of all, I have a Lyme serology that is negative, so the patient says, I'm suffering with brain and joint symptoms. So they would go to Dr. Shor and say, are you sure I don't have Lyme? Or other questions that this test can answer is, how do I know that the antibiotic worked? And this is a third question that is very relevant and very, again, controversial, is that, is it possible that I'm infected with a different tick-borne disease? So let aside Lyme by itself, this is already a very serious problem, but there are a high number of other diseases that are tick-borne, transmitted by the same tick or different ticks, and they can persist. They are not maybe sensitive to the same antibiotic treatment that Lyme is sensitive to. And so even if we treat and successfully eradicate Lyme, maybe there is persistence of another tick-borne disease that, again, we don't know how to diagnose. We don't have any molecular solid clue or solid proof that is in the patient. So some results of the patients that were treated and diagnosed in our clinical trial show that it is possible to understand when the therapy worked, because there are a number of cases in which the patient before therapy was positive, and then the doctor prescribed an antibiotic therapy, and the test reverted to negative. And very significant, there was a case of a young woman, the young lady, 15, teenager, that had very serious seizures and joint pain, and the serology test was negative. The doctors didn't know what was going on. She was tested with the nanotrap test and turned out positive, so the doctor treated her for the infection, and the symptoms went away. So this is one very powerful example, I think, as of how a good diagnostic test can give us the right clue, and we can find out really what's going on with this patient. So thinking about adding problems to the problems and the complex reality, here are examples of other tick-borne diseases. So we have anaplasmosis, babesiosis, ehrlichiosis, tick-borne relapsing fever. Some names you might have heard because they're typical of this area. Some other tick-borne diseases are maybe more prevalent in different geographic areas of the United States. Rocky Mountain spotted fever, tularemia, Colorado tick fever, Bartonellosis, Q fever, and then there are these very aggressive and lethal viruses, Powassan virus and Bourbon virus. So these are all pathogens that can be transmitted by the same tick or different kind of ticks. But again, the patient will not know if they harbor this disease based on the molecular test. The diagnostic challenge is the same for Lyme disease and the other tick-borne disease. So since we were already thinking about this problem, we thought now we have to try and extend our approach in such a way that we can diagnose Lyme disease, be it early or at late stage, but also increase our chances of seeing these other tick-borne diseases. So we decided to use the nanotrap and use another technology that is called mass spectrometry, and it's very, very dear to the people like me that spend their life to do proteomics in the daytime. So what it is, it's a very complicated technology, and the output is a spectrum like this. So it's a barcode, I would say. The reading of that, we use softwares, we use to predict and matching with known genomes, and there is a unique output. Every spectrum is matched to an individual protein. So we have the way to go from this very complicated mixture of proteins to a single and uniquely identified protein. So we ran this mass spectrometry technique with the nanotrap on a number of animal models and human patients in order to see what this mass spectrometry could tell us about the infectious disease that the patient was harboring. So we started with the hamsters that happened to be a very good model for the Babesia macroti infection, and our colleague at the TCC, Dr. Robert Molestina, kindly let us use the serum and the blood. No signs of urine yet, so he still has to figure out how to collect urine from the hamster. But what we saw, and it was very important, that Babesia is an intracellular disease, so it's inside the red blood cells. And everybody thinks that the only way to detect it is to analyze the red blood cells, which would be a logical conclusion. Nevertheless, with the nanotrap and the nanoparticle, we can see antigens that are shedding into the plasma, and a very high number. And because of this, we think we're going to be able to see it also in the urine. So following this principle, we analyze patients' urine, again, of chronic patients that were not getting better after a number of therapy cycles. And we found proteins that were belonging to Borrelia, as we suspected, and Babesia, and Bartonella, and Francisella, and Mycoplasma pneumoniae, and Anaplasma, and the list goes on. So this was, in reality, one of the first successful attempts to demonstrate that the same patient is actually harboring different diseases, and if we don't treat them correctly, they will persist, and they will make their health degrade over time. This is the story of my interest in diagnostic and the story of the Lyme test. And of course, nothing would have been possible without the terrific scientific team at Mason and at Series Nanosciences. And here I acknowledge also the funding. The particles were developed under NIH, and then we're fortunate to receive a lot of funding from a number of agencies. And I certainly thank you for your attention, and I will welcome all your questions.
So now here's your chance to ask these experts, thought leaders, and heroes, they really are heroes, about your questions about Lyme disease. And when we're done, you can come up and talk to our leaders in person. So who has the first question? Yes? Amy, oh here, okay.
It's my understanding that you're testing for the outer surface protein A on KDA31, is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
But doesn't the CDC not recognize the KDA31? The CDC, I thought, would not recognize 31.
31 was one of the most highly specific protein that was used to as the antigenic stimulus for the vaccine. Initially, it was 31 and 34 were used for the vaccine, and it's my understanding that early on they didn't want to confuse the potential positivity if an individual had received the vaccine. Why they don't use it now is unclear to me.
Will they ever accept your nanotrap, seeing as how it's 31 and they still don't recognize 31 as positive?
We shall see, but certainly so one question on the 31 is also that the CDC test looks at the antibodies. So we are looking at IgM, IgG, and so we are seeing if the patient has the antibody, if the body has made the work of producing the antibody against the antigen. We are looking for the Borrelia antigen itself. So it is the same band, and the Western blot looks the same, but we are looking on the other side of the coin.
So the FDA study right now, you're under study with the FDA, and they will accept it being the OSP31 then?
Well, we certainly hope so. We are gathering all this amount of information about the OSPA. So the OSPA is known to be present in the early stage of the Lyme disease. It has been documented by other groups. It is, as you say, and as Dr. Shor said, there is a story about OSPA, the vaccine, so there is some, again, controversy about that. But we have independent proof from independent laboratories that OSPA is in the blood of patients that have acute Lyme disease. And there is sign of genome at the genome level, so the OSPA gene present in the human host, in the skin and in other body fluid. So there is scientific evidence there. Whether or not the CDC as of now or the FDA as of now, they endorse that specific band in the serology test is different.
I can add some commentary to that, just to emphasize when the CDC's reference to band 31, that is for the antibody detection. We're detecting the antigen, which is an entirely different biomarker, or direct biomarker. So at the scientific level, we haven't had that dialogue with them, but if they're decent scientists, they should recognize there's a huge difference between those two. It's not even in the same conversation. And the FDA's opinion of it, we don't have one yet. We're compiling samples. We're getting ready to conduct a bigger study, and we're actually developing the device right now, which will be this point-of-care device that we can deliver to a physician's office. So point-of-care means the test is being performed there while you're visiting. And once we have that fully validated internally, we will then take it out for a full clinical study. So we're doing the full, rigorous study, and at the end of the day, the data will speak for itself.
Another question?
Have you ever thought of using these nanobots as a small cure to cancer or any other sickness?
That is a very good question. And as a matter of fact, we have some ideas and some very promising results in that field. We can put something in these nanoparticles that helps our lymph nodes or our immune system to fight against cancer, and we're certainly going to pursue that.
Thank you. I actually have two questions, and I don't know if you covered how long it would be before this is available, and then for patients, and then also, do you think that the treatment will change? Because I know my family, we all suffer from it, and I know that it's always, you've treated for a month, so now you should be done, even if you have signs of it still. I mean, I know that's an opinion question, that second one, sorry.
Well, I can address the timing for our test to be delivered. At present, we do offer it through our collaboration with George Mason. They have a clinical lab, a CAP-CLIA lab, which means it's of the same level as what you'd get at a Quest or a LabCorp. And we've set up a team in there who's actually sitting at this table, and there's some more information about it here, who performed this test in that lab right now, but it's on a small scale, but it is available to patients.
Talk to these people.
I can sign up to that.
Yeah, you could leave your
Anyone
information.
who can sign up.
They can tell you more about it, how it's done. But the test that we're referencing, the point of care that we're going to take through the FDA, that's a pretty involved process. It's going to raise a lot of money to do that, and that's probably going to be, we hope, early 2019.
Right. With respect to the management question, my hope is that with this technology, we will be able to prove that in fact the present recommendations are inadequate, and that in fact we started to prove that in the 2015 publication. But we need to do it in such a way to educate the wider medical community and the players that are responsible for making guidelines. And that's a challenge.
I just want to say thank you for all of them. You've come a long way.
I have two questions also. One was on this chart. Actually, I was curious what the time frame scale is there, like from the tick bite to when the antigen first reaches peak? Is that weeks or is it vary?
Days, no, it's week, because in 2 weeks or so you see the antibody, so this time scale is quicker.
Okay.
I wanted to qualify. This is a classic IgM, IgG response. Unfortunately, Borrelia has been shown not to have a classic response, and there are various potential considerations for that, both in animal and human models, that chronic Lyme can be associated with IgM positivity. So this is not, this is the classic approach, but there's value, and in fact, some of our patients that were in the 2015 study, publication, were IgM positive and nanotrap positive, and they were chronically ill.
My other question was on the graph of the map of the United States. Do I see like all those dark spots on the United States East Coast here near where we live? Is that meaning that it's a high populated area of ticks or where Lyme disease was discovered? Or?
That's Lyme disease incidence. It's increasing in Virginia. It's epidemic state in epidemic level in Virginia, but it's also growing rapidly in the East Coast as well. Northeast is the highest incidence.
One of the interesting phenomena that I had learned when I was on the governor's task force is that Virginia has the dubious distinction of being a central focus of the deer tick coming down from the northeast, but also from coming up from the south, the Lone Star tick. And the Lone Star tick is far more prevalent than the deer tick, and Borrelia lone stari, which is a Borrelia burgdorferi-like organism, can cause a Lyme-like condition.
As a chronic Lyme disease patient who's just been diagnosed, could you see this being part of a treatment plan to see the progress that you're making with the medicine that you're taking?
That's certainly a potential consideration, and on preliminary studies suggest that there may be value in that, and so that we're looking into the value and potential.
Particularly if there's multiple infections, co-infections, that Dr. Luchini could show that it's really true that can happen. You get one bite potentially from a tick. That tick is infected with many different organisms, and all of those are transmitted into the patient. So we often think we only get one infectious disease at a time, but that's not the case for these patients. And Dr. Shor has been suspecting this for many, many years in his patients. And so you treat them with one type of antibiotic, the other infections persist, as Dr. Luchini said, and maybe you'll have to change your therapy to fight those.
So far, they've found Borrelia and Bartonella.
Right, through technology that's not all that sensitive. So the fact that we treat people because of clinical presentation, because we suspect that you're presenting with certain characteristics. But if we have the capability of having a real sensitive tool that could give us a broad spectrum of the co-infections, that would be a game changer.
I would like to ask if maybe the non-response, or maybe the symptoms that still appears in a patient after treatment, is how does it is it known what percentage is maybe relapse or reinfection? And I'm also wondering if you are working on using the nanotraps for trapping DNA, for taking variability, genetic variability of the strains?
I'm going to answer the first part, and I'll let them answer the second part. To begin with, one of the questions that we who deal with this chronic disease are constantly asking, why is it some people are chronically ill even after we throw so much at them, and others just sprinkle a little doxycycline and they're fine to go? Why is it that some people can get into remission and some can't? And we feel that clearly there's an infectious component, but there are other factors. There's genetics, there's toxicity, there's biofilm, there are other factors that perpetuate. Some people just get too toxic and can't clear the toxins because of methylation or because of biotoxin illness or because of mast cell activation syndrome, which is a new phenomenon we're learning about. So if we don't address those issues in the chronically ill non-responders, then they're just not going to get better.
I'll take the nucleic acid one. So in collaboration with Dr. Gilman, our lab did a nanotrap capture of DNA of Chagas disease with the same concept of having a urine test or blood test that can tell us the presence, of congenital Chagas in the newborn that is born from an infected mother, or to understand the reactivation in HIV co-infected Chagas patients. Our colleagues, they have used the same technology to not only capture DNA, but also whole viruses, HIV, Rift Valley fever, and also exosomes. So it can certainly be tailored and adapted to target the different polysaccharides, lipids, but nucleic acid is certainly a big component of it.
These are very sophisticated questions. Are you sure you aren't scientists out there?
Yeah, I'm coming from Peru, and I would like to, it's amazing the work that you are doing here, and I would like to contribute if I can.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll finish it up so that everybody can have time to go up and speak to our physicians and scientists.
Has there been any decrease in the incidence of Lyme disease in areas where they have culled the deer population?
Not consistently. I chair the Loudoun County Lyme Commission, and one of the early tasks that we were asked to pursue was integrated pest management, and that includes a myriad of approaches to dealing with deer and the mice and a number of other, let alone the ticks. Unfortunately, there has not been a cohesive, concerted, consistent approach to dealing with the environment.
All right, well, we would like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. We would also like to thank our sponsors, Prince William County Department of Economic Development, ATCC, Mosquito Joe, and Series Nanosciences for this evening's event. I also invite you all to come up and speak to our scientists to do some science experiments here in the corner. We have Series Nanosciences, which has mentioned the kits that they have here. We have the Suburban Whitetail Management gentleman here talking about how they're controlling the deer population in the suburban area. And we have Dennis here from Mosquito Joe thinking about how we're controlling the ticks in this area that's causing the Lyme. And we also have representatives from NatCap Lyme to answer any of the questions that you have about Lyme disease. And thank you all for coming. We will send out a survey, so be looking for that, because we want to hear what are you interested in hearing next year, because we're proud to say this will be offered again next year.
Let's have a special round of applause for Amy Adams, who is the leader and developer of this program.